Thank you. I just thought I would hold up the voters handbook that I received yesterday. It's 221 pages long. I think it's a reminder that in California, every California is a policymaker. The question is, how do we get all those policymakers out there who are not in this room up to speed on these issues? Because I just doubt that many people are going to be, including myself, are going to read 221 pages and very, very small print as well. Longer than an LCAP, Dave Gordon points out. So, one point, we haven't heard that point made, that the LCAP is shorter than the Voters Handbook. This next panel really is intended to get at the heart of what we are trying to accomplish here in California, which is to move from the sanctions, prescriptive, top-down model of school reform to a support model. And the goal of this panel is to really look at how are we going to make this work. And you know, one of the great assets of California is its people. And we just have an extraordinary panel here today representing absolutely some of the most influential, brilliant, and dedicated people committed to making school reform work in California. Chris Edley is the co-founder of the Opportunity Institute, former dean of the UC Berkeley School of Law. I'll just mention that I first met Chris in the 1990s when he was in the Clinton administration, and was absolutely influential in saving affirmative action from being basically abolished by the Republican Congress at that time. You may recall the slogan, "Mend it, don't end it," and I believe that was Chris's formulation. And those struggles continue, but the Supreme Court, I think, most recent decision indicates that affirmative action is still in place in some form or another, although California has its own struggles on that front. Jennifer Thomas is president of the San Jose Teachers Association and a 13-year veteran teacher as well. Thank you for joining us today. Sujie Shin is Director of Research and Data Assessment for the Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And Arun Ramanathan is CEO of Pivot Learning Partners. Many of you may remember him from his tenure as head of Education Trust West in Oakland, and Pivot Learning is also in Oakland. Finally, Dave Gordon, veteran educator, currently superintendent of education in Sacramento County. Counties, as you all know, play a key role in making these reforms work. So I'm going to jump in and go to Sujie Shin with the Collaborative for Educational Excellence. That really in a tough spot. Everybody's looking to this new tiny state agency to make all of this work. I will say that Carl Cohn sends his regrets that actually they have a board meeting today in Sacramento of the Collaborative. But Sujie is a key player in this collaborative. So let me turn to Sujie Shin. I'll just ask you, how is the collaborative moving forward on making this, putting flesh on the bones of this support paradigm?
Sure, thanks. You know, I think the key piece for us is really thinking about how we do now take the step and move from the system away from compliance and focusing on what continuous improvement and support will look like across the state. You know, I think right now we are focusing on building a system that's going to be flexible enough to both address the local priorities that are built up, sort of reflect the local needs and local areas of focus, and yet still identify or be robust enough so that we ensure that the highest standards are met in how we support students, teachers, and schools. Right now, I think we are in this really great place where we have some time built into the system to really get out there and talk with our local districts or county offices and charters, to talk with them about what is working and what would true support that reflects their local needs and reflects their local practices and priorities look like on the ground. As part of that system, or part of this work over the next several years, we're identifying partners with county offices, districts, and charters who are going to really partner with us to dive more deeply into what true capacity building looks like, how we truly implement locally focused cycles of continuous improvement that are focused around locally driven issues and build in local discussions, bringing in stakeholder input, truly reflective of that kind of district, again, county office, and charter school need. So again, right now as I'm speaking, we're in the process of working with our board in Sacramento to identify some of the pilots that are going to be identified over the next couple of years. And I think that's, that really highlights the work that we're doing, and that we're not coming into this with a silver bullet to solve any kind of particular issue. I think, we brought up this issue of vampires, and, I'd like to say there are no werewolves in, the problems that our education system faces either, right? So there's no silver bullet that's going to solve any one problem, for that's in the same way across the state for our districts and schools. And so our priority is identifying what has worked, spotlighting what has worked in different places across the state, but also outside the state and even in different countries, to identify best practices and lessons learned and apply them really to what schools and districts in California need.
Can I just ask you, I believe one of the goals of the collaborative is to visit every county in the state.
That's right.
How far along are you on that? And what kind of support, let's say, are you getting for this support paradigm that the state is trying to implement?
So we have reached out to all 58 counties. We have visited about 47 so far, some of them more than once, to talk with districts, their district leadership and county leadership. I think some of our conversations have progressed really deeply in thinking about how they're viewing this work. I think the interesting thing that we're taking away from this is that, we've got 47 visits, and those are 47 completely different conversations around how they are supporting their districts and schools, and the sort of local priorities that are being lifted up in terms of how they talk about their local control and accountability plans, what they're focusing on in terms of their strategic goals for the next several years.
And could you just mention, so we get this on the table, the collaborative is beginning to hold workshops, and how do people participate in that?
Absolutely. So we have now, there are 3 strands of professional development that the collaborative is pushing forward over the next year. In the next month, in November, we have 8 large-scale workshops across the state. Those states have been identified. So across the state, we are convening all stakeholders, schools, district, county office folks, but also parents, community members, advocacy groups to come in and basically get on the same page around how we talk about the local control funding formula and the local control and accountability plans. The focus of these workshops is really going to be around where we are in the development of the data dashboards, the evaluation rubrics, how we turn around and discuss these tools in our schools and districts.
Okay, I'm just going to jump to Dave Gordon, Superintendent in Sacramento County. And Dave, just let me put this out there. I think a lot of people are skeptical that counties in general, not necessarily your county, have the capacity to provide the support and oversight that's needed to make this work. I mean, this is a new role for the counties. What is your take on how the counties are actually going to be able to contribute to making this work?
Well, at the risk of being a little redundant, I just want to go through once again. Our county has 13 districts ranging from 240 students to 63,000 students, which is the 5th largest district in California. Taken together, the counties are a $2.7 billion enterprise, $2.7 billion enterprise. And to them, we have introduced just in the last 4 or 5 years, a totally new financial system, a new governance system, new content standards, a new history social science framework now just coming out, a brand new and evolving assessment system. Science tests are under development, others will be under development. New approach to school discipline, suspensions, expulsions. And based on the results of a task force the state board commissioned, we hope, some changes to our special education program. About 2 years ago, the state board and the State Department sponsored a task force which made some very important recommendations about engaging more special education students in the general education system. So hopefully there'll be some changes there. So in our work in my county office, we have really tried to focus on helping those 13 districts build their capacity to better meet the demands of an LCAP and all these other changes. Let me just give you a couple of examples of what we mean by helping build capacity. Last year, 1 year ago, we tracked the number of teachers that districts are unable to hire by the first day of school. So last year, we had one district with 100 unfilled classrooms, another one with 60. This year, after working with the human resource departments, we have a teacher training program that our office runs. We're down to about 20 in each of those districts. Now, that's not where we want to be, but that's progress. Secondly, we're sponsoring a pilot around early mental health intervention in one of our smaller districts that we hope will be a way to prevent young people from needing more severe interventions down the road. And it's a very small district, but we're hoping to expand that kind of pilot. We have engaged with the core database. So our districts collectively have adopted the core database, and we will be using that database collectively to share information and to share ideas, because I think if
the core districts, is that what you mean?
the core districts, because I think in all of this, no one has all the answers. It's by working collaboratively and collectively that we will get the assistance that we need to the districts. We've also engaged with CCEE in a partnership with WestEd, and we're going to be one of the networks that they will be setting up, again, to share and bring resources to our school districts. I could go on, but I'll stop.
Can I just ask you, though, you've told us what you are doing in terms of, and again, California's a big place, 58 counties, but do you think most counties have the capacity to do the kinds of things you and some others
I think
do?
many of them now do. I think others could come to have them, not necessarily all within their own county office, but in our area, we're the hub county for a 10-county region, which is all the counties around Sacramento. So we provide a great deal of assistance and support to the other counties, as some of them do to us in delivering our services.
And just to clarify, do you see the counties, how important do you see the counties in making this aspect of the reforms, holding districts accountable for what they said in the LCAPs?
Well, I think the counties are crucial because, as was mentioned before, one of the key issues in making these LCAPs work is making sure the budget actually reflects the things that are in the LCAP in the form of a strategic plan. And just let me give you one example that, Louis, you and I have talked about. One of the things that effective districts do without fail is they maintain expenditures for professional development, high quality professional development. They don't cut that. when the budgets are reduced. They would not think of cutting it. Just like if you were tradespeople, you would not take away the tools from your tradespeople because then they couldn't do their work. We've relied too much on one-time money for professional development. It can't be that way. Any smart company or enterprise invests in its people. So we've been really working with our districts to emphasize the importance of keeping money budgeted for high-quality professional development. We provide some of it they get elsewhere, but that's something we'll be continuing to push for in the future.
I'm going to come back to Jennifer Thomas on that, but before I get to Jennifer, I wanted to get Chris Edley into the conversation.
Later.
Later. Okay. After Jennifer then. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes, Jennifer.
Oh,
Professional development.
because I haven't figured out what I want to say.
Dave Gordon, he puts this as a major priority. There's been a lot of talk about support. Teachers are obviously at the heart of this entire enterprise. What kind of support do teachers need, and how are teachers going to be held accountable for actually making all of this work?
How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
All right, great. I agree that there's nothing more vital than the quality professional development and support we provide to classroom and non-classroom educators every day. Almost 400,000 people working with 6 million students in the state of California, and our capacity to train, to motivate, and to provide opportunities for collaboration and ongoing learning are vital. As with many of the things we are implementing in California, though, right now what we do is we just add that on top of what we're asking teachers and nurses and counselors to do for students every day. So the first part of the question is, what do classroom teachers need? They need time with their colleagues to think through what they're doing, to plan together, to learn together, to push each other, and to reflect. How will they be held accountable for that? My first question is, how are we going to be held accountable for making it possible for teachers and other educators to learn and grow together on behalf of our students? Because right now, all we've done is add that as one more best practice for them to implement without additional time or support to make it possible. So until we can make it possible, we're never going to get to a place where that best practice actually impacts the classroom.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give Chris more time to think.
But let me follow up on it. I just want to get this issue on the table, the teacher shortage issue that has been, we all know about in this room, differs from district to district. But how does this affect the landscape in terms of really implementing this newer approach when just getting qualified teachers into the classroom is a challenge?
Absolutely. I mean, it makes it, it's another thing that makes it impossible to actually make it happen. We cancel professional developments in San Jose Unified all the time because we don't have substitutes who will come and work with our students, and the safety and learning of our students is our number one priority. The state, I really keep going back to the metaphor about weighing the cow. We have to weigh the cow, and the scale has to be right, but there are so many things that are missing from the equation, and until we have difficult conversations about funding systems and sustainability and reliability of those systems so that districts can plan, so that they can make long-term plans without worrying from year to year about what to cut and what not to cut, until we can bring back the arts, until we can bring back science to every kindergarten classroom that doesn't have 40 kids in it, it is very difficult to even get to the question of how do we train teachers. The governor had several opportunities this budget cycle and this legislative cycle to create innovative training programs and opportunities for teachers, and they were all vetoed, regardless of the fact that we have experienced a 75% decline of teachers graduating from credentialing programs in the state of California over the last decade. The legislature has got to understand that the number one most important controllable issue in our classrooms is the quality of the educator in it, and everybody in this room understands that. But how we fix broken systems and funding and in priorities in California will be the conversation we have to have before we figure out how to release a group of third grade teachers to go work on Common Core math.
Okay, I'm going to hold off to be going to Chris, but I'm going to go to Arun. Arun, you are now actually out there working with lots of districts, and you have a good sense of what the needs of districts are. But, what do you see as the kinds of supports that districts will need in order to move forward in the areas that we've been talking about? What are some of the critical areas that you and others and people in this room should be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question. And I think it goes to, one of the overarching issues that this forum is focused on. And it also gets to something that Jennifer was saying. I mean, you took us up from the trees to the forest, right? Like, what are the big issues, the finance issues and other issues facing the state? But we also have these issues about student outcomes and the shortages that we're going to be experiencing because our kids aren't graduating college and career ready just in terms of our workforce as a state. And the demographic changes that are sweeping our state, our system, and our schools. Our schools are the front and center in that shift. The majority of our kids now are kids of color. And again, I think we're trapped right now to some extent in a set of trees, and all these trees have acronyms associated with them, right? Like, we are really, really good at creating new acronyms. But we've kind of lost sense of what the forest is. What is our goal as an education system? Where are we trying to get to? I spent my yesterday volunteering with a group of leaders at the Solano State Prison in their Entrepreneurs in Training program. It's a great program. It's through an organization called Defy. But when I walked into the prison, there's 200 inmates there. And what I saw was 200 adults who the system didn't help get to where they needed to get to, college and career ready. And all of those adults were African American, Latino, and Asian. And so we need to step back and think about where we're trying to get to first as a system, and what messages that our state leaders are sending in terms of the goals that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to end this, school to prison pipeline. I went around and asked a lot of these prisoners where they came from, the schools they went to: LA Unified, Compton Unified, Oakland Unified, Hayward Unified. One of my greatest terrors was running into one of my former students in that room. And I think that's the first thing that we need to do before we start thinking about these acronyms and what their meaning is in terms of the lives of our kids, is what are we trying to get to 5, 10 years from now for these kindergartners in our classrooms, for the 6th graders who've made the transition into middle school, for the high school students. And I kind of feel like that's been lost to some extent in this forest of acronyms. I think the second thing that you need to have when you have all these acronyms is at least some level of coherence in terms of what they mean in terms of a system of improvement, right? So right now we've got CCEE, great acronym. We've got the County Office of Education, CCESA, by the way, that's a great acronym too. We've got Pivot, we're PLP, Pivot Learning Partners, and we've got a nonprofit community that's a really vibrant community in the state. And so the question is, in terms of the LCAP, the outcomes that we're trying to get to with all of what I see as equity-oriented initiatives, Common Core implementation, the local control funding formula, NGSS, who can provide the support in a structured and logical system for districts relative to where the districts are, their size and their capacity, and also charters too at the same time. And how can we explain that back to the system? I still think that we have some work to do on that. We also have work to do in terms of just rationalizing LCFF and all the different indicators and outcomes that districts and schools are trying to get to. So I guess basically what I'm saying is that, if we're going to get to those big overarching outcomes, this desire to, close the school to prison pipeline, to make sure that all kids are college and career ready, we actually need to have an explainable system back to our educators as to what the interventions mean, who's going to be doing them, who's providing the supports, how many indicators that you're trying to get to, how many goals you're trying to get to, which ones are meaningful and which ones aren't. And we're just not there. And I think that's the job of this next session of work in the legislature, and for everybody up here, is to get to a way that's actually explainable, that first, before it actually becomes meaningful.
Chris, you've heard some of the comments, and you come from a civil rights perspective, an attorney that's spent time in Washington. How do we make this support paradigm work? Do you think it can work?
So I guess here is where I should explain why, when we did the grading exercise, I wrote down 3. First, I want to say that I've only been in California 12 years. And before I took the job as dean at Berkeley Law, I had never spent 2 consecutive nights in California, except for the 2000 Democratic Convention, and said lots of disparaging things about California.
Well, welcome to California.
Yeah, but I'm not going back east. It's great. And I've spent hours and hours and hours talking with the U.S. Secretary of Education about policy issues, and only a few minutes talking with Mike Kirst, who is a friend and whom I admire very much. So my perspective really is, I know, heavily weighted towards the national. The new federal statute, ESSA, has 23 provisions requiring states and districts to undertake stakeholder engagement. 23. The reason for that is that while Republicans were intent on defanging the federal role in promoting equity and excellence, progressives still have a hopeful strategy of transforming the political dynamic of educational opportunity at the state and local level by inserting these requirements for stakeholder engagement. This is a hypothesis, right? It's a theory that by intentional engagement of new voices and empowering these communities, the politics of education resources, the politics of our aspirations for equity and excellence will be strengthened even in the face of less equity-oriented interventions from above. Now, let's compare that aspiration with the LCAP system. Now, the traditional model of stakeholder engagement is you chat with a few of your friends and you invite everybody else to come to the high school gymnasium at 6 p.m. on Thursday and speak into the mic. I will bet you dollars to donuts that there are more districts in California who did stakeholder engagement for their LCAPs in that mode than they did by focusing on how to make sure that the right people are at the table, prepared to engage deeply, substantively, in what the strategy in their district should be, and prepared to have a dialogue in which an informed set of stakeholders are truly partners in charting the future for the kids in the district. It's hard to do. It's hard to do. In contrast, the LCAPs, by and large, which of course are difficult to go through because they're in PDF form and there are a lot of them, a lot of it is boilerplate, not very sophisticated, and it will take capacity building for them to be that. Well, where's the capacity going to come from? I echo what Arun has said and what Superintendent Gordon has said. Well, what's California's response to this need for capacity building? Well, number one, there's been virtually no investment in data systems, so that we will actually know whether the great gamble that is LCFF and the LCAP system, whether that great gamble will actually achieve what its sponsors hope that it will achieve. The early returns are not promising. We're not seeing imaginative new investments in targeted populations. We're mostly seeing the filling of potholes that remain from the recession. We're seeing the repackaging of the status quo in new clothes. What's going to make that situation change so that we can in fact achieve, the state can achieve the goals that it set before itself? Well, number one, I think it's going to require a more serious approach to stakeholder engagement, which we can talk about if you'd like. Number two, I'm sorry folks, but there just isn't enough money in the California system. And from a national perspective, you are an example of what not to do when trying to improve education. And the California exceptionalism is, in this context, something to run away from. I mean, we've been talking about vampires and werewolves. Well, my concern is vampires. That is to say, not the faux human beings, but faux accountability systems that do not, in fact, result in the kind of continuous improvement with hearty ambitions for equity and excellence. And I'm very concerned that that's what California is moving to, because we're still at this moment in which the principle of subsidiarity, which the rest of the country calls devolution. Does that mean local empowerment, or does it mean state abdication? To me, the signs point mostly towards the latter, because there have not been sufficient resources invested to make the former, local empowerment, meaningful, meaning evidence-based, with sufficient resources to accomplish our goals. So, watch out for the zombies, is my message on that. And finally, let me just say that this point about stakeholder engagement and the war on vampires, they're related, because the stakeholder engagement will hopefully be a predicate for building a stronger equity community throughout the state, which is a predicate for transforming the politics of educational opportunity, which in turn is a predicate for getting the resources needed to be sure that educators have the best practices available to them, the best supports they need available to them, and that the children in California get what, let's pick an example, Kentucky does for its children. That's right, Kentucky is a role model for California. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go to Sujie Shin, who's also been worked in various places around the country, but you are visiting school districts. The issue of resources. I mean, do school districts have what they need to be able to really move forward on these reforms? And I know your CCEE now has gotten close to $30 million. I'm interested to know actually what that money is going to be spent on.
And the state education budget is how much in total?
Where's Mac Taylor?
What's the state education budget total, approximately?
60 billion. Depends what you include, 60 billion.
Right, but it's a lot more than 30 million.
Yes,
right?
well.
30 million, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
Yeah.
right.
Look,
Sujie.
I think the short answer to do our districts have everything they need to make this new accountability system successful from the ground, starting from right now? Absolutely not. You know, I think we are on the precipice, in California and thinking about what this new accountability system will look like. It's a seismic shift in terms of how we have viewed the way in which we support our schools, districts, our students, and how we hold them accountable for all the different sort of indicators that we have outlined. I think we really take to heart, and I heard a lot of conversation today about sort of the humility in our approach to this work, and I think that was really encouraging. I think we at the CCE to really take to heart this idea of continuous improvement, and I am optimistic. I put an 8 on that earlier exercise because I think I like to see a system in which a continuous improvement is reflected at all levels of this conversation, that we're not building a system that is sort of set out in stone from day one, but that we're coming to the table and saying that we are invested in really thinking through what stakeholder engagement looks like from the ground up, what accountability looks like to truly support students in schools at all levels. I think some of the lessons learned that we've talked about in terms of what some of our districts here are doing, I think some of our districts are doing really exciting, innovative things around all the indicators that we've identified as being critical to our success. We've, in our conversations, seen districts really use the LCAP as a starting place for truly engaging in deep and meaningful conversations about how they support our students across their stakeholder groups, including parents, community members, students, and teachers, and reflect that in this ongoing sort of discussion about how they both implement, evaluate, but then improve those initiatives on a regular basis. And that's really encouraging. I think some of our conversations across the state and even outside the state, looking at the approaches that different states have taken to things like professional development, to teacher recruitment and retention, which I think are really critical. A lot of states, I think like New Jersey, Tennessee, who have really robust teacher professional development systems around very specific initiatives. They're much more centrally driven, and that might be a lesson for us to take forward. This is an accountability system that hasn't been hardened yet, and there may be places where we focus on locally controlled and locally driven priorities and initiatives, but other places in terms of maybe teacher recruitment, retention, hiring, that may really, need to be a little bit more centralized. And I think that's another way to have that kind of budget conversation as well. We have some time, and I'm hoping that we really, I would really love to see the legislature and our policymakers, as well as all of us, engage in this discussion about, not just developing a system and then throwing it away in 2 to 3 years when we don't see, this achievement gap, that we talk about that took much longer than 3 years to develop. And, we're at this, I just want to also just take a moment to say that we're at this place now in our country and in California where we've seen the largest, income gaps since since before World War I. We're seeing the greatest, amounts of segregation in our schools and communities since before Brown versus Board. We're seeing a lot of community issues, right, come into play, and that our students are bringing into the classrooms. And to think that to expect that our teachers and our schools to close that, to address that, and address those imbalances in a cycle of 2 to 3 years, I think is really unfair and impractical. And so with that, I really, I'm encouraged by the starting conversations of a measured approach for how we develop a system, again, that truly focuses on local control, but also identifies this focus on continuous improvement and a continuous conversation, again, at all levels, to think about how we create a system that is truly equitable to all of our students.
Arun, you wanted to make a quick comment on that. We're going to go to questions from the floor in a few minutes, but Jennifer, I know, also wants to get in on.
So I think right now we're in a balance between continuous improvement and the amount of time that we actually have left in this governorship, right? So that's a pretty straightforward thing, right? Because things change, politics change, politicians change. And, again, it gets back to this issue of coherence. For school districts, what are you responsible for fixing? The old system was very clear on that. The new system is not that clear yet, but it can get there, and there are great strengths and potential in the new system. Once that's identified, who is actually responsible for identifying, what you need to fix? And that's still unclear, and that kind of has to be worked out. Again, that will help cement this system for the future, a potentially better system. And then the next question is, who's going to provide the support? And how much of choice do you get in that? All of those are questions that I think we can work out. I actually think California can be a model for the nation if we can work those questions out. In fact, I think districts can be supports for other districts too in this new system. But we're not having those conversations yet, and we really need to start them now because, again, we're running a little bit out of time to firm some of this work up.
Louis, can I just briefly?
Let's just get Jennifer in quickly, and then we'll go to Chris. Yeah.
I couldn't leave today without underscoring the point that the only people less empowered in these processes than parents are teachers. There is so little interest at the state level, the legislative level, at the policy-making level as to what the everyday classroom teacher thinks about dashboards, about accountability, about talking around things, about policy. They don't care. You got teachers working at the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy, trying to feed kids, clothe kids, work with kids who are experiencing violence, working with kids of middle-class families who don't have access to PE, to art, to music that they used to have while their families are mad because the poor kids are getting everything. And they are trying to make 2 hours of math a day work. So until we actually care what classroom practitioners are saying, and I don't know a district, maybe besides mine, that really does, none of this is going to change, and we'll just continue to nibble at the edges.
Okay.
I just wanted to double down on Arun's statement that there really is a possibility in this new framework for California to become a leader if it is implemented the right way. And if additional resources are put into the system. I think particularly the accountability structure that Linda and Mike and others have designed really is exciting. But I'll also say this, just as an example. This argument about an index versus a dashboard, everybody agrees, well, everybody I talk to agrees that there should be a dashboard. But many people I talk with, especially in the civil rights community, think there should also be an index built on the dashboard. What ESSA requires is that states identify lowest performing schools and do so in a transparent way. If you can come up with a way to identify the lowest performing schools in a transparent and consistent way, statewide, that does not involve an index, good for you. Let's see it. So from my point of view, the question is making sure that behind any index or summative measure, there is ready access to understandable detail. And finally, let me just add on this point, because I know it concerned a lot of people in the room. Look, my problem is that there's behavioral science on this issue. You may have seen a story several months ago in the Wall Street Journal, I think, on research about nutrition labeling on cans. And they did this experiment on how the nutrition labels influence shopping practices. And one group had the kind of nutrition information you currently see, and another group had that plus an index, 1 to 10. Is this good for you? Right? And behavior changed with the latter group, not with the former group. Something simple enough for consumers to respond to, and then look deeper, So I think of that as a tool for increasing stakeholder engagement, because it begins a conversation admitting that we have work to do, and then you continue the conversation discussing, and what work is that? And are we going about it in a smart way? So California is going to change, I hope.
I'm going to ask, we're going to put up a question on the screen here for you to just ponder for 2 minutes at your table. And this is the question. Having listened to this panel, are you more or less convinced that California's more supportive approach to school improvement will contribute to better outcomes for all students. Rank on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being less convinced and 10 being more. I'm just going to give you 2 minutes at your table. Just talk to the person next to you as to how this panel, this discussion has influenced your thinking.
Arun, you look at the 2 years as, we gotta hurry up, and I look at the 2 years as, God, when can we get a governor who's more supportive of education? So that's what that we get more, that we really get an education.
See, I don't think we can waste 2 years.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree, but
I mean, that's why going to prison yesterday terrified me. You know, I'm looking, there were 19-year-old kids there, lifers, and
I agree with that. But my frustration with Jerry is that he won't spend any political capital to change the political power.
But we have other people who could be sending those messages.
That's certainly
Still given the same like, same balloon, right? And you squeeze the balloon in order to improve things for groups of people, and it depletes it in some other way for other people.
Right. It's a zero-sum game right now. And that's one of the biggest threats. But at least the architecture should be gotten in place. Everybody's fighting about the architecture right now.
And then you've got all these teachers out there who this is their third round of education reform, right? Yeah. They just go, they come in all ready to go and fired up. We're going to change the system, and
I guess the architecture is great if there's capacity building that goes along with it, right? I mean, it's just like Common Core is great if you can invest in the teachers to be ready to deliver it.
We also try to build parent education.
That's a good point, right?
I don't expect parents to do this. It's too expensive. I'm in Palo Alto. 6th district is actually what you do.
Okay.
No, of course not.
Okay, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, San Benito, Monterey counties. So we're supporting the work of almost 300 PTAs from Palo Alto Greenfield. Boy, it's hard to have a meeting when
Maybe we can get that. Maybe we can get that comment in. Okay, I'm going to get the. Okay.
There's nothing in federal law that tells a state don't take a district improvement approach to tackling the right. But I agree with you on the system.
And of course, hiring top talent without requiring them to martyr themselves and their families because they can't.
Okay.
Or a director of HR. Wouldn't that be amazing?
I'm trying to wrap up the discussion here and also at your tables. While you were having your discussion, the panelists were having their own discussion. And I think one of the things they agreed on is... Thank you. Thank you. The panel, while you were having your discussion, the panel here was also talking about what will be needed to make all of this work. And I think one of the things that they seemed to agree on was that this governor is not going to run for, is it a fourth or a fifth, sixth term, fifth term, but that the next governor will need to be a governor who's an education governor who will continue these reforms. So the next election to worry about. Okay, I'm afraid to ask this question. We'll see what influence Chris Edley had. But I did hear Chris being supportive of the approach, but really pointing out some of the real hazards and pitfalls, and a reminder about the resource issue, which is like totally key in California.
If you ask the question, do you want the next governor to keep on keeping on? My answer would be yes, but it's going to require a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, just a quick poll. Those of you who ranked, after listening to the panel, were more convinced that the supportive approach could work, please raise your hand. Those of you who are less convinced, the less have it. So the key here is what are the concrete steps that will be needed to make this work? So I'm going to ask, we have literally about 5 minutes left before lunch, for people to come up and make very brief statements. Literally, we have just a few minutes. We're going to have lunch and then come back to Mayor Libby Schaaf, will be talking at 12:30 about her vision for education in Oakland and beyond. I'd really like to hear what you think what's needed to make this work. So if you could just very briefly give us your thoughts on that. I know that may not be what you came to the microphone to talk about, but I'll start with you. Yes.
Okay. I want to,
Sorry, could you identify yourself?
The California Collaborative for Educational Excellence has been in existence, developing for the past 2 years. It's the one bright spot that I see in California education. You have an outstanding leader, Carl Cohn, who brought the Long Beach School District up from very low level to being rated as one of the 5 best school districts in the world. And he has the understanding of how to go about improving education in California. He's working with the Blythe School District now. When he went out there, he talked with the educators. Then he looked at the newspapers and so on to pick out an event where he might meet public leaders. And he and the educators went out and talked with the employers, the people that hire our kids coming out of schools. And that's the approach we need.
Thank you.
I hope others are tuning into that idea.
Thank you. Could you identify yourself?
Hi, my name's Erwin Morton. I'm here representing PTA for 4 counties, about close to 300 schools, 50,000 members, and I just wanted to share 2 ideas that might help here, both quick.
2 minutes.
Less than 2 minutes. One is that in 20 years of trying to build parent engagement through building communication, I found that this is very hard, and we need all the help and advice we can get on how to get parents involved, because simply sending them information doesn't do it. Some of them aren't receiving it, some of them are getting so much that they lose it, they don't pay attention anymore. But we really do need to get more parents directly involved, not have 90% of the work done by 10% of the people. My other thought is that all of the ideas involved in LCFF and LCAP are wonderful, but good ideas that are either underfunded or inconsistently funded do not lead to immediate success, and the public has a very short attention span. And my fear is that the lack of immediate improvement in many things will lead to the public blaming it on the original ideas when it should actually be blamed on the funding mechanisms. And so again, we're looking for help in understanding how to make sure that these programs have the financial backing, the fiscal backing, in a consistent over time that will allow them to flourish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Linda Bald, National Board Resource Center at Stanford University. I have the answers, you guys. Jennifer, thank you for your comments. I've seen it over and over again. For myself as a classroom teacher, it's the hardest job I ever did. Well, okay, parenting is the hardest. Second, teaching. And I have the privilege of working with educators, going through board certification and supporting them in that process. And I see, Christopher, I feel like, and Arun, your point was so powerful, and equity is I think, the key of it all, and so many of us are like white teachers trying to understand and reach our students of color, and you need to be able to work with other teachers of color in order to understand where is my cultural lens blocking my working with these students or these families. And it's in the process of board certification where teachers do a deep analysis. What am I doing to reach out to parents? How am I reaching my students? What's happening to my students who are not succeeding? And then we're talking with each other, and we're doing a lot of soul searching, and that's where the answer lies, you guys. It is giving teachers the time, as Jennifer said, and the resources to analyze and learn from each other. And when those teachers get board certified, they are hot to make a change. And we don't have a place for them to plug in. So let's tap into the amazing talent that we have in this state with our educators, give them a chance to get certified or the path that they want, and put them at the table, as Jennifer said, to start listening to them for what they and their students need. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut. Do you have 30 seconds?
Darlene Wallach, Luther Burbank School District in San Jose. So I think a lot of our problems are associated with putting so many people in prison. Our prisons don't have any kind of rehabilitation programs, making sure there's education and programs there for people to come out, making them contributing members of society. Also, I think our system in California is such that people don't have wages where they can afford to live anywhere. Our housing costs are so high. So we need not just affordable housing, but we need jobs that are paying people decent salaries.
Thank you. I think get some support up here from the panel as well. I'm going to just ask Dave Gordon if he had just a closing comment about next steps here.
Well, I think I have great optimism that this can be done. It just can't be done by any one group working in isolation. And I think by forming partnerships and working together, we have partnerships all over the place within our county and across counties and with private providers. I think we can get this done. And I fully agree with the notion that we have to keep the customer in mind. Why are we here and why are we doing this? And just as a side note to this, if anybody in your communities is needing a reason why they should care about education, take a look at the data on birth rates. We're running out of young children, and we can't afford to not educate a single one of them because our future as a state is at stake. They have to be productive in our society as good citizens and contributing members of the community as well as wage earners. So keep that in mind.
Chris Edley wants 6 words.
Good data is a civil right.
Six words. 6 words. Well, this is not the end of the conversation. It's part of an ongoing conversation. I just want to thank this extraordinary panel for tackling a